present today. I think this is an opportune time to discuss the World Assembly resolution that was just passed last month, and just discussing what are the implications for clinical trial registration. So for the purposes of today, what I will do is I'll start off with the introduction and give you some background of why we have come to this resolution, and touch on a little bit about the World Health Assembly resolution, and just give you some ideas for those that have not seen it. And then I will talk about the requirements in our registries, which is PECTA and CENTA. And then the last slides, I will talk about the implications for clinical research in Africa. What this resolution, what are the implications for clinical research in Africa? So as a way of introduction, we need to understand that when one embarks on conducting a clinical trial, they are actually committing to conduct the trial and report the findings per the basic ethical principles. That includes preserving the accuracy of the results and making both positive and negative results publicly available. So there is a significant proportion of the research that remains unpublished. And that doesn't.
Can you please make sure that your microphone is muted? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Solange. So with the limited number of research that is unpublished that we don't know about, it results in selective reporting. And the selective reporting may lead to incomplete and potentially biased view of what the trial is and what the results mean. So we need to also report both positive and negative results of a trial. So the undisclosure of results have an impact on the patients themselves that we are seeking to find interventions for, the practitioners that need to provide the interventions to the patients, and again, also the policymakers. How would they be able to be well informed about the health decisions that they have to make, or even put the interventions that we find in the clinical trials into healthcare decision practices and policies. So there has been concern, and we have seen that even with COVID-19, and I'll use COVID-19 throughout the presentation, concerns over underreporting of adverse events, which has increased the demand for more transparent processes by registering clinical trials and reporting their findings. And we know that from back into 2005, trial registration has become widely accepted and implemented. However, I think we're still looking at clinical trial registration as one of the tick boxes that we need to do before we initiate our trial conduct. And I think we need to do more and use these databases to report our findings. And now I'll talk about the WHO International Clinical Trial Registry Platform, and I'll elaborate why I'm talking about WHO when we are in South Africa. But the first thing that I want to highlight is that the clinical trial registries that we have globally, including clinicaltrial.gov, the Pan-African Clinical Trial Register, there are many other registries across the globe. They send information to the ICTRP, where anyone across the world can be able to access the ICTRP portal. And I must emphasize that this is not a registry, but rather a portal where it collates all the data from registries across the world, making it easier to to understand whether that particular trial exists, in which context, because it links directly into the registry that the trial was first registered. And we see that there is value in the registration. The value of registration goes far beyond than just the administrative benefit of having complete collection of all the trials. It also helps us, it helps in enhancing transparency in the research, making it clear which trials are being conducted so that individuals, anyone can anticipate the findings of those trials, whether positive or negative, and learn from the conduct of the research that we are doing. Now, I'll come to the World Health Assembly resolution and highlight a little bit why this has come to this point. And it was more or less sparked by what we have seen with COVID-19. And it seeks to strengthen clinical trials and improve public health. And the COVID-19 pandemic has made it clear that there should be a need for high quality clinical trials to respond quickly and effectively to the global health threat, which is the COVID-19. So this resolution is a positive step in the direction to achieve the desirable goals of strengthening the world's clinical trial capacity. And if you're interested in downloading the document, it's publicly available, and I've attached the link on the slide. And just a little bit about the background. I took this data from Oxford University, just looking at the first 10 months of the COVID-19 pandemic. And what we see is that there was blossoming of clinical trials conducted across the world. And what we see is that there were a lot of observational studies, there were some interventional studies, but some of these trials were really problematic in a sense that they had insufficient sample sizes to answer the specific questions that they were asking. And also the methodological quality of these trials did not give confidence of the data that emanated from those trials. Therefore, it failed to generate robust clinical evidence needed to inform decision-making and effect change at that time. So I think we need to learn, or we need to do more in terms of what we are doing and actually start to think about the next pandemic and take the lessons from COVID-19. And when you look at the number of observational studies, if you look at the graph that I have presented here, you see that there's a high number of almost 500 observational studies or trials that we saw with COVID-19. But observational trials sometimes are not as rigorous as the interventional studies or trials. And the challenge with observational studies is that one, it becomes difficult to identify what would have happened if the patient or the participant had not been given a specific drug or intervention, because you need to be able to compare and make conclusive decisions around the effectiveness of that intervention that you are implementing. So the standard practice in interventional trial is that you would have an intervention, you'll have an intervention and a placebo where individuals are randomly allocated to either the placebo, the treatment group, or even the best existing treatment at the time to find what works best. And with the small number of sample sizes that we saw with COVID, it became really difficult to make decisions and actually be confident with the findings that emanate from the clinical trials. So just looking at the World Health Assembly resolution document, and I took some screenshots. It's very small for you to see, but I've just summarized it as bullet points on the bullet points. But I think there was a need or a recognition that well-designed clinical trials are needed. And there is also an acknowledgement that clinical trials are important in finding interventions and solutions to a pandemic. So that is not questionable, but well-designed and trials of good quality are important. But also the resolution highlights something that is very crucial, which is about collaboration. Because often with clinical trials, the trials are conducted without collaboration with other entities or other researchers, which makes it difficult to channel funds, especially in resource-limited settings. So this resolution, again, highlights the importance of collaboration when one is looking at conducting a clinical trial. Multi-center trial, to quickly answer a specific question in different contexts to answer whether the intervention works in those contexts that the trial was conducted. And also what it highlights the importance of the trial participants that are participating in this trial. And we need to recognize the important role that they play in these trials because they participate in these trials, and there's probably risk of interventions not working, and probably they also looking with anticipation that the trial is going to serve the world, and they feel that they are contributing to the better good of the world. So we need at least to report the findings and be responsible to our trial participants. But also, the other important thing is about the clinical trials need to be health need driven, so that we don't just conduct clinical trials for the sake of just conducting clinical trials and put the word COVID-19 because we need to think about resources that we have, especially in the African context, where they are limited, and we need to be directed and conduct these clinical trials to answer a specific question or find interventions for our context. And we need to promote equity in the clinical trial capacity. So those that are well resourced and they have the funding, they have the capacity to share some skills and knowledge to those that wish to participate and kind of like have a balance in terms of how we conduct clinical trials. But the more important thing is the rigor in the clinical trials that are conducted and the involvement of stakeholders. World Health Assembly resolution, it prioritizes the development and the strengthening of national clinical trial capacity. And it increases clinical trial capacity and strengthening clinical trial policy frameworks. So how we are conducting clinical trials, maybe we need to do better in terms of how we are approving these clinical trials. What are the frameworks that need to be improved? So this World Assembly is actually asking us to look at our framework of how we are conducting clinical trials. Coordinating clinical research priorities based on public needs. And I think this is far more important because we are in a space where resources are shrinking year by year. So we need to be focusing on the health priorities and be able to get out of pandemics and find solutions that are helping the nation at large. And we saw also with COVID-19 that collaboration with private sector funders and academic institutions actually propelled in how we eventually find interventions, vaccines and therapeutics for COVID-19. So we need to build on that even more. And there is a potential role that regional organizations in coordinating clinical trials and even beyond how we recruit participants, it becomes important, and that also touches on the clinical trial policy framework, and a number of organizations are looking at how this World Health Assembly resolution impact them in terms of their role in clinical trial conduct and yeah, in their role of clinical trial conduct. But I think the one thing as researchers that we need to be aware is that it encourages research funding agencies to prioritize and fund clinical trials that are well designed and well implemented. I think in the near future, this is what is going to impact us when we are thinking of clinical trials, because funders now need to look at whether the trials that we are conducting are well designed and implemented, and in fact, they are even in the clinical trial registries. So this is further detailed here in this section of the World Health Assembly, where as part of the grant conditions is that clinical trials can only be funded if that trial has been, it encourages the use of standardized data protocols where available and appropriate, and to mandate registration in a publicly available clinical trial registry within the World Health Organization, within the ICTRP and other registries that meets the standard. So we have. So now funding becomes important. Funding actually puts these grant conditions in terms of how these clinical trials are going to be funded, and also on the systems on systems itself. I think it's more on the ICTRP and also even other stakeholders and partners to promote measures to facilitate timely reporting of both positive and negative interpretable clinical trial results in alignment with the WHO joint statement on public disclosure of results. And this is not a new phenomenon where now we need to report clinical or have a plan on how we're going to share our trial results. I think now this is taking it a step further, and it is a responsibility on us as registry administrators to look at systems of how we're going to work with researchers to report their results within the 12 months as stipulated by the World Health Assembly resolution. Again, this point speaks to the infrastructure that is available. In our case, we are looking and working with WHO to look at what infrastructure, what are the changes that we need to make in our databases and systems to allow for researchers to conform to the international standards and also report results within the 12 months. So if you are interested, Solange could also share the PDF of the resolution. So now coming back to our registry, which I'm almost towards the end of the presentation, Some of you may know that we are housing two registries here at Cochrane South Africa. One is the Pan-African Clinical Trial Register, and that is the primary register, and it feeds data to the WHO. And the second one is the National South African National Clinical Trial Register, which is stipulated in the South African SAGCP guideline that for any trial conducted in South Africa, it needs to register with CENTA. And we are now in a process of having the CENTA database aligning with WHO officially, where if a research is conducted in South Africa, they can just submit on CENTA, and that information will appear in the ICTRP. So that will be coming in the next couple of months. So as just as a history of our databases, for those that may not know, is that we started running database or clinical trial registries from way back in 2006. And in 2020, we redeveloped the South African National Registry to conform to WHO standards. So as it is now, both databases have been redeveloped and relaunched to conform to WHO standards. I think what is left now is the formalization of the South African National Registry to conform to be officially recognized by WHO, which will make things much more easier for research. And any updates that we are doing on either registry, it applies to both. And just briefly, these are the data fields that we are collecting. And what I would spend a little bit more time is on the reporting section, which is what we are talking about today, which the World Health Assembly requires us to look at. So when you look at PECTA, we already have a data field where we are collecting the reporting section. And what makes this important is that we even put a hint in red text, to make individuals aware that it is mandatory for a trial to complete at least a plan before when they are starting their trial. Put up a plan on how they are going to share their study findings. And that has helped us in a way because we were involved in an analysis with other colleagues, Oxford colleagues and data sharing working group that I'm part of, where we saw that because we have made this field mandatory, so the Pan-African Clinical Trial Register came at the top. Almost 100% of all our records are completing the plan, but now we need to take it a step further. Yes, the plan is there. How are you going to share the findings of the trial? With who are you going to share the findings of the trial? But then now we need to take a step further and say, from 12 months, from the time that your trial is completed, how do we then get the results reported in the registry, which is what the World Health Assembly calls us to do. Again, I'm just highlighting that even the South African registry, we have made that mandatory that every researcher must complete this field to conform to WHO standards. Now, when you have your results now available after your study is completed, all you need to do, you need not need to re-register a trial. You simply go to your profile, you access your record, and all you need to do is to go to the reporting tab, and you go to yes. You click on the yes and say, yes, I've got the results now, and it will open up the fields that you need to complete. And as a guide, the results that we are looking for at the moment is the baseline characteristics, the participant flow, adverse event reporting, and outcome measures. And there is also a document that we have attached on the database for further information to guide you on how to report the results. So this is really something that we are encouraging researchers to come back and update. And also on our side, in the next couple of months, what we are doing is to remind researchers that have their trials completed to come back and update their results, because we have a dual responsibility of ensuring that the results are available. And I think it would be pleasing to see results in the registry and being up to date. And as a researcher, you would want your information to be constantly up to date. And I think looking at the registry and taking out the notion of it is an administrative task, but rather just as a tool to share your results, it's also important. And you can even refer the participants to the registry as well, because it's publicly available. And some of the lessons, I wanted to just share a little bit, some analysis that we have done recently, where we looked at COVID-19 vaccine trials in our registries. And what we saw is that only 4% of the COVID-19 vaccine trials were registered in our registry. 4%, and you think about all these COVID-19 vaccine trials that are happening globally, but 4% are registered. And out of those 4%, and what we see is that a lot of them were indicating that the phase of the trial is unknown or it's not applicable. And the sample size of those trials range from 50 participants to about 2 million or so, that big number. So then we start to see why this resolution becomes important, because yes, we are conducting a lot of trials. We hear about all these trials in the media, in the news and everywhere, but where are they? Can we be able to see what the researcher has planned and what are the outcomes of those trials, so that we can make informed decisions about the interventions that they were assessing? So to end off, I will talk about the implications for clinical research in Africa. And I think it's more emphasizing what the World Health Assembly resolution calls for. One is to build capacity for clinical research and its conduct and the conduct of research, to improve standard of clinical trials and ensure that they are of adequate size, to increase the capacity for trials to be quickly run and improve and provide results timelessly. I think this is more now the dual role that we need to play together as researchers and us as administrators of the registries, to work together to update the registries. But to build awareness around clinical trial registration and clinical trial transparency through registering in a publicly accessible clinical trial database, and to improve coordination and reduce duplication in these trials, so that we ensure that the trials are targeted for the illnesses of importance, and we can save a lot of resources in that regard. And making sure as well that when we are thinking about clinical trials, we are thinking about the populations, or all majority of population groups are included in these interventions, because we are aware that trials that are conducted in high-income countries may not necessarily be relevant to low-income countries or in Africa. owing to our context that is so diverse and different. So we need to try, when we plan our clinical trial, to think about the implication of those trials. And standardization of protocols and timely sharing of pre-publication data with health authorities and appropriate trials in the registry. I think this is something that we need to work together to have a system that will work in terms of updating this trial results in our registries. And also timely incorporation of the results in clinical guidance and policy, because once it's public, the results are publicly available, then it's easier to think around policy, to think about our results or our findings guiding policy development. And on our side as registry administrators, what we are doing at the moment is that we are looking at sending emails. So what I wanted to share is that we will be sending a lot of emails to researchers, especially those that have their trials completed. We request researchers to come back and update their records. We need to also understand areas of capacity building. What can we do as registry administrators to build capacity around the conduct of clinical trials? So we will be probably asking or surveying researchers of what is it that is needed for what needs are needed from our side to help researchers to conduct research as effectively as possible. And we are collaborating and working with stakeholders regionally, nationally, and even globally to see how we can have a more coordinated research in Africa. So that works well in terms of channeling funds and understanding what are the needs for the African continent, for the South African continent in terms of conducting clinical trial. But the last point, it's a call to researchers to work with us in these efforts because now we can see with this resolution that it's not going anywhere. We need to at least update our information in the registry and keep the information up to date because it's got implications not only just for the researcher publishing, but it has a ripple effect in terms of whether do you get another funding, because funders now are going to look at, have you registered your trial in a registry? So there is more or less like a push towards having trials in a registry and actually be accountable to have the trials in the registry. So with that, Solange, this was my last slide. I'm happy to take questions, discussions, concerns. Over to you, Solange. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks so much, Dudu. That was really great. We do have a few questions in the chat, so let me just go back to the first one. We have a question from Nathaniel, who's asking, for center, when will the option to go back to the system at the end of the study to enter study completed / closed be made available to sponsors and or investigator sites?
Repeat the question, Solange, I lost you there.
For center, when will the option to go back to the system at the end of the study to enter that a study has been completed or closed be made available to sponsors or investigator sites?
So it is available even currently. A researcher just needs to go to their profile where the trial is and access the record and update their trial information.
Great. Then we have a question from Nisa, who's asking, please advise if the WHO portal or Pancter have data fields on access to effective interventions.
That's a good question. Effective interventions, maybe if Nita can elaborate more on effective interventions. Is it about the study design, or is it about whether the interventions have been effective?
Nita, do you want to unmute and pose that question?
Hi, so excellent presentation. Thank you very much. So as we all aware that with COVID, one of the lessons learned was not getting access. And so especially in South Africa, but in Africa, we contribute tremendously to many clinical trials for HIV prevention. And recently with HIV, we've got the vaginal ring, we've got the CAB-LA. So my question there is that as we're doing these clinical trials, one of the gaps is what is the discussions with sponsors, et cetera, on access? And in my opinion, that needs to come up front before the results so that there's plans, there's preparations, there's capacity development as we did through MRC with the formation of the COVID vaccine development lab. So it's about access plans within the indicators. Thank you. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Nita. That's an important question. And I think it's not only at the WHO level that this discussion is happening. And to answer you is that at the WHO ICTRP platform, we only collect what is available in the registries. But whether there was access and whether we are collecting what does it mean in terms of access of these interventions or of these interventions to the population, that would be a different forum, not necessarily of the registries. But I'm quite sure that those discussions are happening because there is a lot of learning from COVID-19 that is happening.
Thank you.
Thanks. Then I've got a question from Stephen who says, okay, his name is different. My name is Hira Maina, Health Information Systems Specialist based in Nairobi. He developed national clinical trial registries for Tanzania and Zambia. How does the national clinical trial registry synchronize with the WHO or the centralized clinical trial registry?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so because, so that question, if the colleague can please contact us because there is a process that WHO has at the moment because there's already a primary register in the African continent. And we need to work with that colleague to have their registry working closely with Pancter because there can only be one primary register in a region. So it's more of working together with the colleague to facilitate them being recognized by WHO.
Thank you. So Hiram, you can contact Dudu and get information about that. Another question from Barbara. Does your regulatory body of Pharmacy and Poisons Board also register clinical trials in South Africa?
So it is a requirement. It is a requirement, but the pharmacy board or regulatory authorities don't necessarily register. It is the sponsor or the PI of the trial that has the responsibility to register a trial with a clinical trial register. And what happens is that when they are submitting to regulatory authority for approvals and ethics committees, they need to show proof that they have captured the trial in the registry.
Thanks, Dudu. Okay. Next question is from Alta Foster. How can we update the old platforms with updated study information of previous studies registered before 2020?
So that you can contact me with the list of those studies, because what has happened with the, I'm presuming that the colleague is talking about center. Those studies should have migrated, but we would need to go into the system and find the profile in which these studies are in, and work with the researcher to have the trials in their profile and be able to access those studies.
Thanks. I see that Barbara. We can go to Barbara. You should be able to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes,
we can. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Judy, for that lovely presentation. And just a follow-up to the clarification you've provided, is that now, as for Kenya, as we register our clinical trials with the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, we're also required to do regular updates. And when you close out, you also update to the Pharmacy and Poisons, and which you do on the website. So all that information is available as per the requirements you have listed that your registry does. So I was just wondering, if the Pharmacy Poison Board is doing the same, and let's say like we decide to do, let's say like our Cochrane Kenya, we decide to add a clinical trial registry, wouldn't that be like a duplication of duties?
The unfortunate answer is that yes, at the moment it does duplicate duties, but I am in discussion, especially for the national one, national registry, to see how we can have a coordinated effort in terms of, you know, a researcher doesn't have to complete registration in multiple places, because we recognize that the systems are very, I think it becomes cumbersome for a researcher to register here, update here, update here, update here. So the systems need to work together or speak to each other and populate information so that the researcher can do what they need to do, which is conduct the research. So that discussion is ongoing, and also even in the African continent, these are the things that we are going to look at. But I'm happy with the South African registry. We've started those conversations, and we see where the gaps are because there's too many parallel systems that are available.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me just find the next question here, which is from Ibrahim Bello, who says, funding clinical trials is expensive. How can African researchers access funding to assist, especially when they're involved in research on infectious disease? I don't know if that's your question to answer, Dudu.
That's a difficult one. I think what I can answer, it's maybe for the colleague to look at more collaboration or collaborating with partners that have resources, because yes, the resources we don't have in the African continent, but what strategies can we implement and put in place to conduct the research that we want to conduct, but still have access to the resources? And unfortunately, I don't have a straight answer, but it's more of collaboration with those that have the funds.
Thanks, Dudu. Then there's a question from Manasi Gard, who says, can you please confirm if results posting is mandatory within 12 months of study completion? Is it either on Pactor or Sanctor? And additionally, on Sanctor, there's an option to add a URL for already published results. Does this URL include results published on any global primary registries or the journal publications?
Yes, it is mandatory on both PECTA and Sanctor because the two systems are designed in a similar way, and Sanctor it's kind of like a replica of PECTA. So we need to update our results in 12 months after study completion. And if you do have a URL to a publication or to a registry, please include that, because you want to have your registry with the most up-to-date information as possible. And it's a plea that let's come back and update information as much as possible. It's kind of like using the registry as your Google Scholar profile. You want to keep it most up to date.
Thanks. There's a question from Jose Ramela, who says, is it necessary to register observational studies on Sanctor?
The answer there is that we work with the researcher because at the moment in South Africa, there's nowhere where observational studies can be captured. So a researcher can contact us. Let's work with the researcher to see how best we can capture the trial. But what is important is that we don't want to lose research, because a registry needs to capture all studies conducted in human participants. So it's really about working together to capture all the information about the study as much as possible.
Thanks. And I see that Manasi, who asked the question just before, has raised her hand. So please go ahead, Manasi.
Thanks, Solange. Thanks, Dr. Dudu. So I just wanted to ask, like we observed on NCTR that the URLs which are already added there, those do not work right now. Like we cannot find any results for any links functioning there. So I just wanted to confirm, like, will this be fixed in future, or is there any are there any specifications to add such URLs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a good question. We are looking at the reporting section, and one of the updates that we are working to do in the next couple of months, it's exactly that because we noted that the URL doesn't work. So we want the results to be publicly available. So there will be some changes on the system, on the PECTA system, and as well the South African National Clinical Trial Registry. Because what is the point of capturing the information and then it's not publicly available? So we are working on that. So the answer is yes, we are updating at that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then next question is from Emeka, and who's asking about the need for you to advise on the need to work with postgraduate bodies like the West African College of Surgeons and National Postgraduate College of Nigeria on the need to register RCTs for their dissertations, because I think the issue is that some colleges don't stress the importance of registering of trials, and then the students, when they finish their PhDs or their studies, they can't publish because they haven't registered the trial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an important point that the colleague has mentioned, and it's really a plea also. Well, perhaps it's a role that PACTA has for the African continent to understand what are the capacity needs in the African continent and actually train and promote the use of clinical trial registry in the African continent. Because I think once we are visible and we are known within, even the pharmacy, the postgraduate school, researchers, any researcher can know that when we are dealing with human participants, you need to register your trial with the clinical trial register. So it's something that we need to do. And hence, in my last slide, it's about capacity building, which is something that we are looking at going forward.
Thanks, Dudu. And just to double check, I can't remember if in your presentation you have your contact details. Some people are asking for your contact details. Is it possible to share that?
Yes, I can put up the actual emails where they can contact us. Sorry, it was the last slide. It was actually the last slide.
Okay, that's great. So we will share that presentation, and then you'll be able to see Dudu's email address, and you'll be able to contact her.
I'm just gonna put it on the chat as well.
Thanks, Dudu. I also shared the link to the evaluation for this webinar, and we'd appreciate that. Just note the webinar that's listed on this date, which is 21st of June. I think the evaluation form says Sanctor/Factor. So that will be this webinar that you'll be evaluating. Okay, next question. There's still a few questions for you. So I think the next question is from Mohammed Usman, who says, intensive critical care researchers are unique and ethical issues can be thorny. Is there anything new you could discuss regarding these types of clinical trials?
That's an interesting one. But I think it's more of the engagement with different stakeholders and for us to be able to be a portal of that useful information that the colleague is looking for. And it is challenging, but it's something that we need to be doing much more so that we can be able to answer this question and redirect researchers to where they need to go and find answers. So I don't have a straight answer, but I think it's something that we need to look at.
So if you have suggestions, I think you're also welcome to contact Dudu and the team and to have that discussion. Okay, next question is from Titus. Is retrospective registration of a trial allowed under any condition? If so, what are the conditions?
So retrospective registration is allowed. And in terms of conditions, there are no conditions, or the condition is it can impact on the researcher not being able to publish their trial results, because some journals are looking for prospective registration. So that is where retrospective registration becomes an issue. So we encourage researchers to register their trials prospectively, especially when they are thinking of when they should be publishing their results. So prospective registration is actually requested from the researchers.
Thanks, Dudu. I think that's all the questions in the chat. If anyone has any other questions, please post it in the chat or raise your hand. You'll be able to unmute and ask the question. We still have a few minutes. Nita, yes, please go ahead.
Hi, Dudu. I wanted to hear your views and thoughts around having these registry details, because it's public information in the consent forms or the patient information. And I say that because now access is so critical to information. So what are your thoughts about that? And the second is, how do we encourage through Department of Health in South Africa maybe a mandatory registration of the clinical trials to address some of the challenges you are facing with registration? Thank you.
Thanks, Nita. That's an important question. Just to highlight that what is on the registry, it's de-identified trial data. So it's not linking to any participant. It doesn't link the participant to the data, so de-identified. And in terms of South Africa, what we are doing is really working with SAPRA and the National Department of Health and actually hold researchers accountable. We've even started looking at 6 months progress report that goes to ethics, that goes to SAPRA, and look at how can we force researchers, I'm using the word quote unquote, force researcher or encourage researchers to come back to the registry and update their information. Because when you look at the SAGCP guideline, it only states at the beginning, when you are about to start your trial, you need to have proof that your trial is captured in the registry. But going forward, there's no guideline that governs what needs to happen throughout the conduct of the trial. So it's really working with partners and stakeholders nationally to try and to encourage researchers to visit the registry and update that information as much as possible.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for participating, for all your questions. Thank you, Dudu, so much for your presentation and responding to all the questions. And we hope to see you again next month. And we will share with you the link to the YouTube video of the webinar, as well as a copy of the slides. Dudu has shared her contact information for herself and for Sanctor and Pactor, and you can email that to be in touch with her and the team. And thank you very much, and see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.